Hello everyone, my name is John Michael Bushman and welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. And we're going to do a deck tech this time around, and we're going to do deck tech for the most powerful version of trains out there, which is Train 9, as the community would prefer to call him, but I just prefer to call it Gotham City, because why else wouldn't you call it Gotham City? You have a bunch of cops going around, quote unquote arresting people, and then you have trains. And when I think of trains, I think of the New York subway system. So there's that. But ignore the fact that a lot of these Xyz monsters are based off of World War II era German super weapons, supposedly. But I'll have to brush up on my history on that, because I do know that Gustav Max is based off of a failed Nazi weapon that fortunately never came to fruition. But again, I'll also have to double check my sources on that. It may or may not be outdated, so I'll do that some other time. But anyway, we're going to go and have a deck tech on Train 9, or the Gotham City deck as I prefer to call it. And I'm not going to do a combo guide for this thing. I'll just go over card by card, explain why the ratios are the way they are, and how each card functions within the larger scheme of the deck. And we're going to start off with the big man himself, the Super Dreadnought. Why should I just say Super Rail Cannon Gustav Rocket? But yeah, Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Rocket. This is the secondary win con of the deck, but this is your main piece to end your board on during your first turn. And that's the thing about the new support that Trains got. They finally have a turn 1 play, and they no longer need to go second. They no longer need to do some janky stuff in order to do their thing. They just need a bunch of level 10s now that very easily summon themselves onto the field and even help out with a bunch of searching. And you can have a negate on turn 1. Although, this guy does have a cost for doing his thing. And rather than traditionally detaching material from itself in order to do its thing, it detaches as a maintenance cost. And if you can no longer pay the maintenance cost, then it will destroy itself. Well, there's a way to get around that, but sadly not with this build in particular. And we'll get to why Cyber Dragon Infinity is highlighted here much later. So, how do we get to the turn 1 win con here? And don't get me wrong, the OG win con, Rail Cannon Juggernaut Libe, is still a pretty damn good win con. Having 2 attacks that hit for 6,000 points of damage is usually more than enough to close out games every time. But this is not your turn 1 play at all, because if you fail to kill your opponent using this, you're better off just linking this away, because by then, Libe has already done his purpose. So there is that. And to get to these guys, we're going to go over the train cards first in the main deck, starting with possibly the best possible card that Trains could have gotten, which is Blue Traveler. And he has a bunch of effects, and you can discard him, add either Train Connection or Revolving Switchyard from deck or graveyard, by the way, to hand. So you're not really at a loss whenever Revolving Switchyard is destroyed. Train Connection is weird, but I guess they needed a way for an OTK deck, basically, to OTK by giving piercing battle damage. So that's why you can also search Train Connection with this. And then he also has a Revival effect, which, by the way, is only once per duel. So keep that in mind as you go through your train combos. The Revival effect that Blue Traveler does is only once per duel. And then the other thing is only once per turn, so you can keep searching either Train Connection or keep recycling Revolving Switchyard every turn you get. But the revival effect of him reviving in itself and then one other Earth Machine monster, yeah, that's only once per duel. So that's something I tend to forget, and I wonder why I can't extend beyond just the initial turn of the game. So there's a Cracktass card. It's a level 10, so it also helps out with the other level 10 stuff that is in the deck. And speaking of, we have another new card in Heavy Armored Knight Babbledecker. So this replaces Knight Express Knight in the easily normal summonable level 10 that doesn't need tributes. And if he's normal or special summoned, you can special summon Earth Machine from hand. And then during the main phase, if your opponent activated a card or effect this turn, you can just Xyz summon in to an rank 10 Earth Xyz monster, so Earth Machine specifically, and it's treated as an Xyz summon. So any effect that triggers off of an Exceed summon will just trigger right away. So a good example here is, well, good transition, is the Flying Launcher, as most people prefer to call it, because of the Infernity Launcher, which was a meme way back when. And this grants the ever-important extra normal summon. So you do have a bunch of normal summons here, although very, very few of them. One of them is the Railroad Stampede here, or Noroi, but we'll get to the K9 stuff in a bit. Flying Launcher, apart from giving you the extra normal summon, it also has a turn 2 play. In case you don't have an OTK line, you can detach any number of materials from the card and destroy that many spell traps on the field. So you would usually have about 2 materials underneath this guy, and then you would pop 2 things. So that's pretty goddamn good. And then the Xyz summon, of course, it searches an Earth Machine, and hint hint, nearly the entire deck is Earth Machines except for a bunch of the K9 cards. But you would primarily use either Flying Launcher or Cleafort Genius in order to search the other negation piece of this deck, which is Therion King Regulus. So the world champion of the Therion clan is here in this deck, working as intended as a negate. And in Duel Links, from what I hear, Therions were taken down by a lot of notches because they were very oppressive when they came out there, and Regulus was even better there compared to the regular paper game. So there is that. He can special summon himself by equipping any card, by the way. Is it any card? Target a Therion or a machine. So equipping any machines from the graveyard, and then he special summon himself. Although you can also just use Babbeldecker's effect to special summon from the hand in order to just plop Regulus down and just skip the equip part in general. So there's also that. And then he can send a Therion card from hand or face up on the field to the graveyard to negate any card or effect. So he's an Omni Negate, and the only Omni Negate actually in this deck. So yeah, you have to very sparingly use a Regulus in this deck. Simply because he is the only Omni Negate, because everything else is either a Monster Negate or I believe just generic pops and or specific negations like I'll discuss later with Ripper over here. So apart from Regulus, the other Earth Machine stuff that is in here is Derek Crane. This is a staple in train decks, although it has been reduced to 1 copy. And as you can notice, a lot of the train stuff is only at 1 copy each because it is surprisingly bricky otherwise. Although you can play trains pure, you just have to bump up the ratios of a lot of these stuff. And of course, once Convex Knight makes its way into the game, you can level modulate even easier. Going back to Derek Crane, this is just an extender. If an Earth Machine is normal special summon to the field, so any normal summon works, any special summon works, so either by Blue Traveler or by Noroi, if they special summon themselves, or if you Exceed summon and then you have Derek Crane in hand, they just plop themselves back down onto the field. And on detach from an Exceed monster, it just pops a card on the field. So definitely really good removal at that. And it's also, by the way, a non-once per turn effect. So if you can keep making Exceed monsters that detach the Derek Crane, you can just blow up your opponent's entire board. So there is that. Now, taking place of Convex Knight for the time being is Bullet Train, which is an easily special summonable body from the hand. Although Convex Knight is definitely going to be the easier one to summon from the two. Some of the builds of this deck cut it at around 41, which also definitely works. But in my personal experience, the reason why I added Bullet Train and eventually Convex Knight into this deck is I tend to not have enough bodies in order to extend my plays. So having Bullet Train here and again eventually Convex Knight will hopefully give me enough bodies in order to do my combos. And Convex Knight is definitely the more flexible of these two because Bullet Train is only really a level 10. Although his graveyard effect of recycling something from the graveyard, adding it back to your hand, can definitely matter, but Convex Knight is definitely the better card of the two in terms of, you know, just being a lot more proactive when you're doing your train combos. So can be replaced, but do not count out the Bullet Train. And then the last Earth Machine in the main deck is Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampede, which got a very sick alt art. I don't know if it's available here in the game yet, but this guy used to be the main starter of the deck because he special summons from the graveyard, so you would need to set up your graveyard for a bit first. So yeah, he was a really good starter and or extender and has only now been reduced to 1 copy. But It's actually a surprisingly bricky card otherwise. So he level modulates himself so by targeting another Earth machine. No, any other monster. I keep forgetting that it just level modulates like from anywhere. So there's that. And then you would change the level either of the monster you targeted, so it also becomes a level 4 like Stampede here, or Stampede becomes the level of the monster you targeted. So by level modulating itself, you can go into a huge plethora of Xyz plays and or, links that require certain levels, but I don't know if that really exists. Then again, I don't quite remember if they do. So there is that. And yeah, so those are the main deck Earth Machine monsters. And then the supporting cast is basically the cops of whatever city the K9 are from. Their lore is actually quite interesting. I haven't read too deep into it, but, Izuna is Bae. But unfortunately, my heart goes out to Lupis because he is the edgelord of all edgelords. I mean, look at that fit. How can you not, if you're a teenager and you see Lupis for the first time, how could you not love this design? So going back to the main stuff here, one thing I learned over time, and I have been practicing with this deck a lot in the background, Noroi, as good of a card as they are, this is not your starter. Noroi is not your starter. There is a reason why Jokul is limited to 2. Jokul is the best starter in this deck, bar none, because he not only gets a body on the board, specifically a K9, but, that's pretty goddamn good. He also searches when he is on the field as the last line of text here. During your main phase, you can add a non-Aqua K9 monster from your deck to your hand. You can literally search any of the other K9 monsters in the deck to just add to your hand and hopefully extend your combos from there. But the play usually is you would plop Jokul down with any other K9 in your hand, preferably either Lantern or heck Noroi even. And then you would search out Izuna, which is the turn 0 play of this deck. And I have seen builds where it was just Izuna and Lupis, and then it focuses a lot more on the Earth Machine stuff. But I have actually tried said build, so I did try a splash of Infinitrax and then some of the K9 stuff in it. And the power ceiling of that deck is definitely a lot lower compared to just focusing on the K9 stuff. So definitely focusing more on the K9 stuff rather than having Infinitrax squeezed in here is definitely going to raise the power ceiling of this deck even more. And Izuna being a turn 0 play and sending a K9 card from deck to graveyard, it is a 3-step process because you send Lupis to the graveyard first, and then Lupis would activate himself, summon himself onto the field, and then you Xyz summon into any of your toolbox rank 5s down here. Definitely a 3-step process, but sometimes it is more than enough, surprisingly. So there is that. And then the other K9 in here is Lantern, just a one-of fun of because he is somewhat bricky otherwise, but he does add a K9 spell trap from deck to hand as an on-field effect, so you can add either the continuous spell, which searches all of the other K9 cards, I believe, question mark. No, it only adds K9 monsters, and so there's that. And then it also does a few other things, like if it's destroyed by a card effect, if it's in the spell trap zone, you can set a K9 quick spell from deck or graveyard. So you usually only really get forced to release. So there is that. And yeah, he also has a revival effect from the graveyard. Well, he grabs someone from the graveyard, so you can somewhat use Lantern to extend your plays. And then of course Noroi, the only thing that is really fascinating about Noroi is it's banned in the paper game somewhere. I don't remember if it's in the TCG or OCG, but there we go. Noroi supposedly died for the sins of Kultun, so there is that. What you would usually do is if you normal summon Noroi and then you summon a K9 from the deck, and then you have Case for K9 on the battlefield, you would usually send Case for K9, even though it does have a secondary effect where K9 monsters gain 900 attack during any turn in which your opponent has activated a monster effect in the hand or graveyard. You would usually gain information on what your opponent's hand contains. It doesn't rip anything out of the hand, but it does shape your plays moving forward, whether or not you should keep pushing further or just let your opponent be stuck with whatever resources they have in their hand. So that's why Noroi is banned in TCG for that reason, because Kultun Rotary does nearly the exact same thing, but she is a lot more proactive with her ability compared to Noroi, just being a cop that, rolls by a window and says, hey, how you doing? You want to know why I pulled you over? That kind of energy that Noroi gives. But Noroi just, is a kind of cop that just checks up on you and makes sure that you're not exactly doing anything illegal. So there is that. And of course, Lupis, he is your partner in crime with Izuna, and these two would usually exceed summon into any of the toolbox of rank 5s that are in the extra deck in order to disrupt your opponent during their turn. So while we're on topic with that, we're going to actually go into that. You usually actually go into Vimana, which is a semi-generic monster negate, and it does have an often forgotten effect where you would target a face-up monster on the field and an Xyz monster or anomaly monster in the graveyard, and then that monster on the field gains half the attack of that monster in the graveyard until end of turn, and then you attach it as material. You would usually have, of course, if it's your turn 0, you have Izuna or Lupus just in your graveyard, so Vimana's first effect won't happen, but in the games that drag out for a little, Vimana could surprisingly hold its own in combat by, let's say, I would have a werewolf in the graveyard for one reason or another, and Vimana would get attacked into, and this did happen once, now that I think about it. They attacked into my Vimana thinking that they would very safely attack into it, and then there was a trigger, and I grabbed onto Werewolf, put it underneath Vimana, and then the monster that was attacking Vimana subsequently died. So there is that. It's very slowly refuels the Xyz material under it because it needs to detach to in order to negate a monster effect. But yeah, this is your turn 0 play in case your other monster negates don't really push through. And then your other Xyz monster for the level 5 quick play slot basically is Ripper, which is the K9 exclusive rank 5 rather Xyz monster. So you can detach a material at a K9 from deck to hand, and then if your opponent activated a monster effect this turn, you can set a K9 quick spell. I said spell again. I don't know why. But so you can set a K9 quick spell from deck or graveyard. So you would usually search out, if you didn't already have the case for K9 on the board, you would use Izuna to do that, or you can also use Izuna herself to, or Ripper. You can use Ripper herself in order to search the quick play spell. So but this is a +1 basically because you use a Ripper themselves, and then you would get case for K9, and then you would get forced release, which now that I think about it is a good transition into it. So you can target a K9 Xyz monster you control, then you special summon from the extra deck K9 Xyz monster with a different name, basing that monster you control as material, and then it treat it as Xyz summon, transform materials, and then destroy a card your opponent controls. That's actually a really sneaky line of text, by the way. That yeah, sure, it transforms, and then you just pop something on the board, which is insane, by the way. So there is that, and then it semi-recycles itself, which is an effect that you don't really get to. Because you would usually not have your K9s on the board once the trains start rolling, basically, at least in my personal experience. That's actually a good way to transition into Werewolf, which is one of the main win conditions of K9, but they would usually semi-swarm the board with a number of creatures, because case for K9 giving 900 attack is not insignificant, because Izuna becomes a 3k attacker. Yeah, a level 5 3k attacker, which is insane by any standards of measure. So Werewolf, he does have a hand disruption effect, so they can take away hand traps, and then of course he can attack a number of times during each battle phase up to the number of materials attached to it, so he can potentially attack more than twice, but that's about the average that you would have with a Werewolf. And then his quick effect, quote-unquote disruption: if your opponent activated a card or effect during your turn, you banish a card from the opponent's field or graveyard, or if it was during your opponent's turn, you just take a card away from their hand. So definitely a really good disruption piece, especially if you started with Ripper first, which, by the way, has a negation for hand traps and or graveyard effects, so definitely goddamn good there. So The other Xyz monster that is usually never used, but it does come up every once in a while, is Jax. And I believe this is a relatively new addition to the K9 archetype. But if you do need a quick effect pop, which this monster usually ends up being, that's what Jax is for. And then he does have a an effect where during any turn in which your opponent has activated a monster effect in the hand or graveyard, any battle damage inflicted is doubled. So it can come up where Jax becomes the finisher rather than Werewolf, but you would usually only really use this for the first effect here. So you can just pop stuff on the board. And then the other level 5s are stuff that you would make in case of emergency. Wind Up Arsenal Zenmayo is a really old school card used in the Zen, I think, a wind up deck way back when. I was just gonna say Zen Meiri, but no, that's one of the Xyz monsters. But Zenmayo is just a slow way to get rid of spells and traps that are on the board, and there's usually a hedge against trap-based decks. And speaking of, there's a reason why I have Cyber Dragon Infinity here. Now, normally K9 decks have Cyber Dragon Infinity in the deck as just an Omni Negate, basically. But I've played with the card and I've played against the card, and what usually happens is it's a trap, basically, especially for this deck in particular, because one very sneaky line of text that a lot of these K9s have is this right here. They cannot be used as material for the Xyz summon of a light monster, and in Noroi's case, you can only special summon a K9 monster while this is face up on the field. So they knew what they were doing. You cannot exactly bridge from Cyber Dragon Nova into Cyber Dragon Infinity very easily with this deck, unless of course you start with Izuna, but it would have to be on your turn. So Izuna+Lupis do definitely go into Cyber Dragon Infinity, but because of the way this deck works, deck space is pretty goddamn tight, so we had to make a cut somewhere, and we had to have more flexible options compared to Cyber Dragon Infinity. And again, like I said, Izuna+Lupis are the only ways to go into Cyber Dragon Infinity. The others don't allow that, basically. They have a straight up no to making Cyber Dragon Infinity. So hence why we have Wind Up Arsenal Zenmayo and Vimana in its place, because extra deck space is just not going to allow it at all. And speaking of extra deck space, before we go into the spells and traps, the other extra deck monsters here, we're now going to go into the Xyz trains, and the OG itself, Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Gustav Max, the beautiful cannon here. I think this is like firing its shot right here. And if the animation for this card is to be believed, definitely it's already like shooting out its load, if you know what I mean. So once per turn, as soft once per turn, by the way, detach a material from this card, inflict 2,000 damage to your opponent. Do note that there is an entire FTK involved around this deck where you have 3 copies of Gustav Max in the deck, and then you would, repeatedly have bodies on board, make them level 10, have 3 Gustav Maxes, inflict 2,000 damage each, and then recycle one of the Gustav Maxes in order to inflict the final 2,000 points of damage to just kill your opponent right then and there. So, yeah. It's not too viable yet because we don't have Convex Knight, just as an additional way to have bodies on board, and of course as a level modulation thing in order to do its thing. Then the other level 10, or rather rank 10, that is in the toolbox of Xyz monsters here is number 81, Super Dreadnought Rail Cannon Super Dora, which is just a thing that can insulate your plays against other negation heavy boards. So Dora is definitely just here to protect your pieces from other stuff that could potentially ruin your day. So or it can also be used offensively, because you just need to target a face-up monster on the field and it's unaffected by card effects except its own. So that can come up where you would end up targeting your opponent's monster instead, especially if there is an effect that let's say you have monster A target monster B, and then monster B would need to be destroyed by card effect in order for it to extend its combos. Well, Super Dora says somewhat no to that, because it makes monster B unaffected by card effects except its own. And if monster B doesn't have any other effects that can destroy itself, then your opponent's turn could potentially be over right then and there. And it also doesn't help that it has a 4,000 booty, so it's a veritable wall that a lot of decks would just think twice. It's not exactly too troublesome these days to have 4,000 attack, but it will make attackers think twice of ramming into a piece of German equipment. So there is that. And then, of course, I already discussed in great detail Gustav Rocket. This is a negate and has 5,000 attack to boot, so why wouldn't you? And then, of course, Flying Launcher. This is just an extender, although it can also attack in case you get into that point. 3,800 is still pretty significant, so there is that. And then, of course, I already said YuGiOh. This is your main finisher. And if your opponent manages to survive it, you can just blink it away and recycle it somehow. And then, just as a backup Xyz monster here, we have Zeus. Rather than linking away the YuGiOh, you can just make Zeus instead, and then just wipe your opponent's board away in case anything bad happens. And then, of course, the Xyz monsters. Clockwork Knight is just a way to get any machine monster off of the field so that they are in the graveyard instead. The other effects here don't really matter too much. I have yet to activate the third line of text here, where you target a machine monster with 1,000 less attack in the graveyard, and then you tribute a machine monster, step this card, and then you summon the targeted monster in defense position. Your only real target here is Babbledecker, but it very rarely comes up, and the only reason really why I go into Clockwork Knight is so that I can send any of my non-linked machine monsters into the graveyard. So that's basically it. And then the main extender of this deck is Clifford Genius, supported by Anger Knuckle, which is one of your main recursion pieces. But we're gonna go to Clifford Genius first. Once per turn, soft once per turn by the way, it just negates 2 cards on the field. A lot of people tend to overlook this little ability that Clifford Genius has because it's a slow negation, but you would usually target a monster on your side of the field that already triggered all of its effects, so there is that. And then you would use Clifford Genius's quote-unquote negation effect in order to bait out negations that your opponent could potentially have. That is what that does. And then the secondary effect is definitely the main reason for the season here, where you would special summon 2 monsters at the same time to zones that the card points to, which conveniently is 2 downward pointing arrows. And you would just search an Earth Machine monster. So if in case Flying Launcher doesn't end up searching, the stuff that you need to either extend or finish up your board with, you can use Clifford Genius instead. And one thing that people tend to forget is the first line of text here. It is unaffected by spell trap effects and activated effects of other Link monsters. I have seen Cyber's players get stumped when they realize that Clifford Genius is unaffected by Link monsters. So yeah, they forget that it has a line of text that makes it immune basically to Link monsters. So there is that. And of course, an oldie but a goodie, still a goodie honestly, and far better now because it has additional targets in Babbledecker and Blue Traveler, is Double-Headed Anger Knuckle. You would send this or any card honestly from the basically any card, but you just send monsters, but yeah, that doesn't really matter. You would target a machine monster, level 10 by the way, and special summon defense position but negate its effects. So a lot of the revival effects in this deck by the way tends to negate the effects of the revival. Similar here with Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampede, which is the first line of text here. You would target an Earth Machine and then you just summon it, and then that's how he regulates his levels from there. And Anger Knuckle does basically the same thing. And then if Anger Knuckle's in your graveyard, you can send a card from hand or field to the graveyard, and then you special summon him. And then, this is a resource loop that he can do all by himself, and you wouldn't really have it anyway. If he's even negated, you can just try again next turn. Of course, if he gets banished, then goodbye to that one. So yeah, those are all of the monsters. And now for the spells and traps that support this entire archetype. We have Exceptional Schedule. This is a Cracktass card that would be utterly broken in any other archetype, and it searches Special Schedule or Urgent Schedule, but we don't really care about the Special Schedule. Urgent Schedule is really the only quick play spell that matters. And then Exceptional Schedule, It searches the quick play, and then you summon a diagram token to the opponent's side of the field. So it basically turns off the Charmies, and then it also turns off infinite permanences or any other effect that requires for the opponent to have an empty field. Exceptional Schedule just shuts all that down. And then the graveyard effect that this thing has, and something that can be used to just further your combos. You banish this from the graveyard and then target a level 10 machine monster in graveyard or banishment, by the way. And then you send the card you control to the graveyard, and then you special summon that monster. Do note that you should not make the same mistake that I do like very often, where I try to send Cleaford Genius and then I keep forgetting that it's unaffected by spell trap effects, including your own. So yeah, you need to send any other card on the field, specifically you control, so in order to revive a level 10 from the graveyard. And then now reduced to a one of fun of the revolving switchyard, there is a dual mate field, or whatever that place is called, where you put your mate on. They made a mate base. There we go. That's what it's called. A mate base out of this revolving switchyard. And this is definitely a searcher. And one thing you need to be careful of is the first like glut of a sentence here, where if a level 10 Earth Machine monster is normal special summoned to your side of the field, you can activate this effect. Your opponent takes no battle damage for the rest of this turn. So if you're going second and you choose to activate the first sentence here, your opponent will not die to combat damage. This is why the FDK deck is semi-popular, at least at the moment, because people tend to forget that this thing, the first line of text, exists, and your opponent will not take battle damage, so you just use effect damage from the 3 copies of Gustav Max that you have in the extra deck instead. So there is that. And then you also special summon a level 4 Earth Machine monster with 1800 or more attack from your deck, and then it becomes a level 10. So it would usually be Reload Stampede here, but you're really only using the revolving switchyard for the second sentence here, which is a lot simpler to understand. You just discard a card, and then you add a level 10 Earth Machine from deck to hand. So that's why it's been reduced to a one of, because it can be grabbed again by Blue Traveler from the graveyard. And then, of course, Urgent Schedule. This is still a Cracktoss card to this day, and I believe it features Night Express Knight. Yeah, it features Night Express Knight, and of course, the Flying Pegasus Railroad Stampede. So, yeah, this guy used to be very important to the deck, but sadly has been replaced by Babel Decker. So there's that. And it summons a level 4 or lower and a level 5 or higher Earth Machine from the deck. Note that this is any Earth Machine, and you cannot declare attacks the turn you activate this card except with machine monsters. So you have to be very careful, by the way, about the various locks that this deck has. You have Noroi here, which doesn't allow you to special summon any other Xyz monsters except canines. And then you cannot use light monsters to Xyz summon from either Lantern or Jokel. So there is that. And there's also the thing, by the way, now that I'm reminded of it, the Infinite Track Splash locks you into Earth Machines. This is why if you're going to really be insistent on splashing more Earth Machines in this deck, you have to cut down on Jokel, Lantern, and Noroi in order to make space, because Izuna is really the only semi-generic Xyz summon that you can do that doesn't completely shut you out of doing stuff for the rest of your turn. So keep that in mind. And then for the other generic stuff here, I mean, it's the Master Duel tax of sadly, Drone Lockbird is still very integral, especially in today's power level of the game. One of fun of Maxi. I wish they would just get rid of this as soon as possible, but I have had games where it was solely decided by, you know, flipping Maxi down on my opponent. And then, of course, the 3 copies of Fualos. You could change the ratios around here. Either you have 2 Fualos, 2 Purulia, because there are a lot of decks that special summon from the hand rather than from the deck. So, and some decks die to Purulia more than they die to Fualos. But this is the Master Duel rank ladder. It's a best of 1. So, you never really know what you're going to face off on the ladder. And then the 42nd card actually goes to Triple Tactics Talent. You can have Nibiru here instead, just as a check to the heavy wombo combo decks that are in the game. But the flexibility of Triple Tac is definitely a lot juicier, to me at least, compared to, you know, just Nibiruing. And some decks, especially the combo decks, can survive Nibiru. So I'd rather have Triple Tac either as a way to further disrupt my opponent or to, you know, extend my plays even further. And then, of course, still the Master Duel tax of 2 copies of Called by the Grave, basically. So you have those. And then this deck is uniquely tailored to carry Forbidden Droplet. I don't know when Forbidden Crown is going to be here on Master Duel, but me personally, Forbidden Droplet is still slightly better. Even though Forbidden Crown is a lot more flexible, but Droplet does negate more monsters on the board. So there is definitely a push and pull here and there, especially once Forbidden Crown becomes available here on Master Duel. And yeah, that is the entire deck here on Master Duel. So if you want to try this deck out, those are my explanations as to why the ratios are the way they are and what each card does in certain situations. Now, next week, I will be posting videos. Yeah, this will be the 3rd deck I will be making videos about on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel rank ladder. And good God, this deck is quite fun to play. I don't really win with this deck a lot because the big flaw that this deck has is sometimes the negate that just Gustav Rocket and Regulus provides, plus some back row, they're sadly not enough, unfortunately. Even with the plethora of hand traps, and granted, this is like a decent number of hand traps in spite of everything, sometimes it's just not enough. There's just not enough sauce in the Gotham City deck to just push past the absurd power levels of the top of the metagame. But if you're having fun, then why wouldn't you play this deck? So if you guys like what you saw, you want to see more, hit like, comment, subscribe, and share this among your friends. And until next time, toodles.